Welcome to a Wondercare podcast with me, Sheena Mitchell. I'm so excited to bring you this special episode just for Mother's Day. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day and get spoiled rotten. And if not, remember, you can spoil yourself. We don't need to rely on others to celebrate us. We should be doing that ourselves because, let's be honest, the little people in our lives aren't always fully aware of how hard it is to be a mum. Today I chat with Jen Hogan, Irish Times journalist, author, and for today only, Jen, don't worry, I won't just describe you as a mother of 7, but today, very importantly, Jen is a mother to 7 beautiful children. We chat all about motherhood, and I really hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to a Wondercare podcast. You are author of excellent book, Surviving Parenthood, and also a regular contributor to the Irish Times on all things parenting. You definitely have your credentials with 7 children who vary in age from 21 right down to 7. It's definite that you have the experience to bring expertise to the field. And yeah, welcome to the podcast.
With the woman with so many children, she doesn't know what to do. She's just missing the shoe.
Well, if anyone has a right to talk about motherhood, it's you, okay? So tell me a little bit about growing up. What kind of family did you come from? Did you have many siblings?
Came from a house of, there was 4 of us all together, so 4 girls. So it was not that large for my generation. You know, people had kind of 3 and 4 kids a lot. Maybe 5 up might be considered big. Before was fairly bog standard in our road. But I always knew that I wanted 7. I don't even know where 7 came from. Perhaps it was the Waltons. Perhaps it was The Sound of Music. These were 2 programs I loved. And I'm the eldest. So I mean, we're not that far apart in age that there were babies in my house. For my daughter, obviously, she was 14 and a half when her youngest brother was born. She's used to babies. You know, she had an idea about it. There wasn't a big enough gap for that to be the case with me. But I just knew I wanted to have loads of kids. I had this kind of total notion that I was going to have a big family. I suppose the funny thing for me is that I have 6 boys. So I have 1 girl and 6 boys. And coming from a house of all girls, it's so different. Because I didn't really know what boys are like, young little boys or even teenage boys. I went to the single sex school, you know, I didn't have this kind of exposure. And then you have these children, my 16-year-old 6'3", and you've got these kind of man-sized children living in your house, and they're just so different. They're so different to each other. Not like you can just say boys are one way and girls are another way. It doesn't work like that. But there's a very different boy attitude maybe to life, and there's different expectations of boys as well to girls. But girls, yes, you have a bit of an idea what you're getting into. So when Chloe came along, first of all, I thought, this is great. I know what to do. I used to be a girl. I know the drill. And I was familiar with girls, having had all sisters. But when the lads came along, even things like clothes, even changing nappies and watching out for the aims, everything from that early stage just was so different. And even the way people talk to boys versus how they talk to girls, the whole interactions there are, the whole expectations. It was eye-opening to me. But look, it's brilliant. I'm enjoying it.
Your perception of what being a parent will be changes when you welcome, I suppose, different genders and whatever into the family. Totally different experience depending on what genders you have, and equally wonderful because I have 2 girls and then a boy, and definitely he's more affectionate at the age of 7. You know, he's very needy, which is lovely. Whereas the girls are fighting for their independence all the time. They just want to grow up.
They do. They fight from such a young age. The girls are kind of pulling away from you. You're not ready for that. And I wonder, is that where the Irish mammy and her sons comes from? Because it's not that you welcome that dependence, because you wish they could use the bloody Hoover and the dishwasher. But the idea of you wish like they could do more things. And certainly I don't have a different expectation of my boys to my girl. Like I expect them all to muck in. None of them do, really. Not enough anyway. They do a bit. But I think we do foster that. I don't know. It's that thing with the boys, because they feel like they need you and because they have this kind of affection that they're not pulling away quite as early. I'm just comes in the teenage years. That's what I've experienced now. Yeah, it certainly comes then. But the girls are so fiercely independent from such a young age that's kind of hard to reconcile as a mom, because you go, no, you're my baby, I don't want you to be independent of me.
And you don't want to be clinging on to them at the same time, so you have to allow them. And it's funny, and you're dead right. My girls are always given out to me for not favoritism, but for kind of, it's like the son almost gets a special dispensation where I just know he's not going to do it, so I've kind of given up asking, and that's terrible.
Yeah,
anyway,
it is.
And your own mum, was she a key figure in your life? And kind of what did your parents teach you about parenting?
My mum was a really strict mum, much stricter mum than I am. And it probably influenced how I parent. I think I made a conscious decision not to be quite as strict. And yet, I mean, every kid thinks they have the world's strictest parents, particularly when you're saying no. I made that decision. And yet I laugh now, because now that she's a nana, she'll hear something that the lads have got up to or done. And I might be ready to pull the hair out of my head. You know, go, oh my God, they've done whatever. And you get, oh, sure, teens, what are they like? And there's this way casual kind of reaction to it that you're going, where was that when I was growing up? You know, totally different now. It's nice because I think at the beginning I'd have been slow to mention if anything was going wrong at home. So if I was having difficulty managing something, because she was so strict and because I think I had taken a different approach, I was kind of afraid to say anything to her, because I thought, I'm going to be judged. I think we all live in that fear of judgment, or to be, you see, if you did things the way I did, this wouldn't happen. Or also because she was strict and I wasn't doing it correctly. And now I realise that that's not who she is as a nana, and that's not how she views it as a grandparent. She's great for saying, you know, you're doing your best by them, you know, and she is actually great for saying that sort of thing, or saying, you know, the kids should really appreciate how much you do for them, and she'll let them off the hook. And it's not that I want someone to let them off the hook. I want to hear somebody say it's okay. I suppose that's what it is. This is what you expect from parenthood. This is what you expect from teenage years, or even the younger years. And it's not all a garden of roses, that, you know, sometimes you're trying to maneuver and manage and navigate certain situations and certain things that are going on in their lives at any stage. And there is great comfort in being able to say that now, without still being that child who I was growing up, who felt that I had to live up to a certain expectation. As a mum, I don't feel I have to with her now, because she already tells me she thinks I'm doing a good job, you know, so she already says that now, and she's much more relaxed with my own children, with my kids, which I find easier then, because then I go, it's okay, I can take this approach, I can do things a bit differently. There's so many different personalities in this house, in my family, and I would see her have a real soft spot for the more wired ones, shall we say, the more excitable ones. And I love that, because I see, like, she nearly defend them. She'll be going, sure, you know what he's like, you'll hear so that
funny.
And it's so nice to hear, because this whole idea of, I think I was quite an excitable child. So when you see your own child be full of mischief, you go, this is really acceptable to her, you know, and it's that thing. I suppose you don't ever move away from that. Your mum is still your mum, even when you're a mum yourself. And so you do welcome that support, you know, you do get comfort and solace from it.
And I suppose, you know, the relationship does change, because when you're growing up, you know, your mother is actively parenting you, trying to enforce whatever kind of values they have. But then the position of a grandparent, they probably really enjoy that, because the way they see it, like, their job is done, and it allows the growth of your relationship to become more on a level par and supportive, because she doesn't need to kind of pick up on your behavior now. You're an adult, but sometimes it can be hard to almost release that guilt from the standards that you put on yourself. I think that's the biggest problem as parents. You know, we definitely keep ourselves under pressure, to say the least.
Huge pressure. I completely agree with you. You know, I'd be exactly there. Like, it's that job, you just don't want to mess it up. It's like the most important job, and you really don't want to mess it up. And then you've set yourself these impossibly high standards. I suppose social media comes into that a little bit, because we're watching people who seem to have it all. And my mum is so talented in terms of, she's an amazing cook, and she's incredible how she can present everything to look aesthetically wonderful and amazing, and like, I didn't get any of that skill, and I'm just looking, I'm like, there going, you know, people expect when you're a mum of 7 that you fit a particular stereotype, and I am not that person. My mum will joke with me about it, but at the same time, she'll still act very proud of who I am. Like, that's perfect, but that's just who Jen is. You know, Jennifer, she insists on calling me. She doesn't get this Jen thing at all. Even as many years as I've been going by Jen, still the only person who calls me Jennifer.
And her right it is.
And her right it is. Exactly.
Do you ever find that when you tell people that you've got 7 kids, like I know you mentioned there at the start that there's kind of disbelief, is there a societal change between now and when we were kids? Because you're absolutely right, 4 was very average when we were growing up.
Yeah.
Bigger families, for various reasons, are more unusual, and I think a lot of it is to do with lifestyle, and we can talk more about that later. Like, it's so hard to juggle because, you know, the roles at home have changed. And it's so multifaceted that I don't think we can go into that so much. But people are juggling so much more, and financially and even just time-wise, it can be hard to maybe expand your family. Sadly, it comes down to financial half the time. So do you find that it's quite uncommon to have large family now and people are kind of surprised?
Really uncommon, and people try to reconcile it in their heads to have a reason. So, you know, you definitely have people check, have you said the right number when you say how many kids you have? You might just be talking, you don't mention how many children you have, and then it kind of crops up and they might ask you, or they'll tell you you've got your hands full if you're out with 3 or 4 of the kids. That's what you only half them, you know. And so but they need to reconcile it. So they'll try to find a reason why you have. So whether that's, did you come from a large family yourself and you're trying to recreate that? Religious, people assume you're extremely religious, and that was the driver, you know, because the church, you're trying to, you know, breed a few more Catholics, and that's what you're at. And there's this kind of absolute, and it's one that's kind of difficult to distance yourself from. I remember when I first started writing for the Irish Times, for example, and I think one of my first columns anyway for them was talking about the ideas that people have about having 7 children. And I wrote something about people presuming that we're extreme Catholics or something like that. And I remember the replies that were coming back on, I'd love to see her views though on divorce and on abortion and all this, and just making all these different presumptions. So that's really hard to distance yourself from. And in the nature of my work, I write about all sorts of stuff. And parenting is obviously what I'd be probably better known for writing about, but I write about all sorts of stuff, and sometimes covering somebody's story, and religion might be part of that, and you realize they immediately make that connection. Oh, she's writing about that, she's got 7. You're going, well, actually no, that's just what I'm writing about today. So there is those kind of things that people make that presumption. I remember being very, very sensitive one time to, my daughter was in school, and when she was in school they were learning something about family size. They were doing this, and there was a thing said about only uneducated women really have big families, and it was just the whole stereotype. It was just really, and I nearly lost my mind at home. And of course her class had enjoyed this. New teacher, Miss Chloe has loads of siblings. And there was this kind of conversation happening, and there is a lot of different things that you have to spell. So it is something that people, I suppose, they make their presumptions, that or they presume you're loaded. And like, I mean, you said that we chat about lifestyle in a minute. There's huge sacrifices go with making this decision to have a lot of children. You know, you weigh up, you know what the fallout is, even career wise. Like, I went part-time from the age of 24 because I was there going, okay, I want to try to be at home. I was lucky enough to be able to be at home. I was trying to balance that and having more children. I knew always I was planning to have more children. You're trying to work patterns that mean you could go to work and you now don't have more than 2 children in childcare at the same time. People are going, how do you manage to do it all? That have 7 children? It must be because she's rich, or she must have a nanny, or she must have loads of help. I don't have any help. My parents don't live nearby. My husband's parents don't live nearby. It is us. We're motoring through, kind of getting on with it. But there is a lot of presumptions about that being the sort of person that you are. It's hard sometimes. It's actually hard sometimes to disassociate yourself from it. And the proudest thing I've ever done is have 7 children. But when you're a professional as well and you have 7 children, there's a lot of people who try to bring you back to being mammy of 7. That's all there is to her. And there's nothing all about being a parent. Anyway, it's a huge, huge job. So to kind of be reductionary like that is terrible. It's a terrible thing to do to a person, and it's a terrible way to view parenthood, or to view mothers and fathers who, you know, do this most amazing job. It shocks people to the degree generally that they'll have to find a reason for it.
What really stands out there is that people try and define you by the fact that you have 7 children. And part of what I wanted to talk about today was
the importance of kind of maintaining a sense of yourself. And look, every parent, no matter if you have one child, because once you have one child, ultimately, you know, you have responsibilities and you need to be in a certain place at a certain time, and your selfish life is in essence gone. So I think the one thing with 7 children is it's important to remember they're not 7 babies. They're of varying ages with varying amounts of independence and at various stages. Like, it's certainly, for me, motherhood was a defining moment, but my youngest is 7 now, and you know, every year as their needs change, my sense of self again becomes kind of stronger, and I'm kind of prioritizing it a lot. And that's not because I don't love my children or want to be with them all of the time. It's because ultimately I feel like if I am honoring myself in a more proactive way, like recently, since January at the start, it felt like the most selfish act I could ever do. I said, I'm going to walk for an hour every day. And I had to do a lot of juggling. Like, for example, this morning it was on a treadmill before the kids went to school, trying to get organised. But like some days, like if Alan is here and not at work, I'll just be like, bye. And I'm not taking anyone with me. No, I'm going. And that felt so selfish. And it's made such a huge difference to me. And for me, I've always worked throughout the kids being young, so they understand work, and you know, that wasn't a choice for us, but I'm very happy that I did have a way to kind of hold on to a sense of myself, and I think that is good for the children to see in a way as well. So what importance do you put on maintaining that self identity, and how do you then balance that with work, which, you know, because there is a tendency to assume that a mother going to work, that's her me time. That's very indulgent to you there. And it's like, no, that's work. So actually there's my work life, there's my family life, and then there's me. It's important to try and balance all those things. And it's a huge job. How do you manage that?
I completely agree with you about, you know, your identity and finding that time for you. I'd love to say I successfully find time for me. I don't have regular time, so I grab it where I can. That's what I suppose is all I can do. I can't manage to fit it into the day, and it's not that I don't hugely value it. I suppose I'm at the stage now where with 7 of them and with 6 of them doing activities of some degree or other, and it's not that everybody's doing a huge amount, it's just that there's a huge amount of kids, so it means everybody's doing things, and that very much eats into my free time in the evening. I also, if anybody who follows me on social media, see I'm writing at all hours. You know, it's not unusual for me to play for David words at 2:00 in the morning. I'm sitting there going, I'm still right, because this is the time that I have to fit it in. So it is really difficult. I think women in particular, because we talk about this kind of loss of identity. We don't talk about this with men. We don't talk about this with dads, because perhaps they go back to work obviously that bit sooner. I don't know. Their lives continue as normal. Not completely normal. Sorry. There's obviously parenthood, it's a huge upheaval, whether you're mum or dad. Even a positive upheaval, it's a huge change to your life. But for us, there's that judgment. Are you going to be a stay-at-home mom? Are you going to work? You know, we are a version of mothers, whereas dads are just dads. They go, you don't hear about, you know, working dads. We just hear about working mums. You know, we don't, that even the language we use around it means that all our identities kind of being pulled in all this different direction. I have not changed since I became a mom. I honestly felt I didn't change. But what happened to me was I felt that I hadn't the time to do what still made me me. And I was nearly railing against this expectation to be a certain person. I don't conform to the type of mum that I should be, that society expects of a mum of 7, I suppose. That's what it is. I'm not a good cook. I'm not a great seamstress. I'm not all those things that traditionally mums were brilliant at. I do enjoy the crack. I still enjoy the banter and the mess. And I enjoy my job an unbelievable amount. You know, we talk about you have your work identity, your personal identity, and your motherhood identity. But my job is like, sometimes, I mean, I work really hard, but I enjoy it more than anything I've ever done in my life. And because I enjoy it, it's not that it's a break. God, Jesus, no, it's definitely not a break. It's definitely not a break. It's like it's full on. But it is something that brings me joy, I suppose. To Marie Kondo, it does bring me joy. You know, I do enjoy what I do. There's been times I've gone, why don't you just get a 9 to 5 and have a job that you switch off, and you don't have things coming through to you in the evening or the weekends, and you don't have to always be in tune with what's going on. But I love that side of things too. It's trying to balance that, trying to be seen as not just a mom. And I hate even saying that because there's no just, as I said there, about being a mom. It is the most amazing thing you do. And whether you work full-time, part-time, stay at home, whatever choice it is you make, it's incredibly difficult. It is really hard, whatever way you do it. And I do think, society likes to pitch us one against the other a little bit. And none of this is happening to the dads. Like, this is where you take our eye off the ball. This is not happening to the dads. They're not being pitched one against the other, but we are. And this whole idea, I suppose, of trying to be who you are still. And it's hard for me a little bit because there's a crossover between being a mama 7 and what I do as well. So, well, like I said, I write about lots of different things. My area that I'd be best known for is obviously write about parenting and family. And this is what I love. And this is my comfort zone, my expertise, where I'm most comfortable. But you find then that even in a professional sense, there's been times, Sheena, where as a professional, I've been on the radio with the male colleague, and we're both talking about the same thing. And I get introduced as Mammy of 7. And my colleague doesn't have any reference made to the number of children he has. There was one time, I remember, a colleague jumped in and went, father of 2, deliberately recognizing it. Oh my God. I mean, I just was so appreciative of him. He spotted this and said it. And I was there going, okay, that's I appreciate, him making that gesture. But it's very difficult even within, and because sometimes it's very relevant to mention the kids. It's completely relevant. It's where I'm coming from. I understand this particular subject that we're talking about because I've lived it. I've that lived experience or had these particular insights. But there are times it's not even, and it still comes up. It still gets mentioned, and you're sitting there nearly scratching your head going, how can I distance the two? And I mean, the most important job to me, which is going to sound completely corny, but I think we all know that being a parent, that this is what I want to get really right. The idea of living with making a mess of hair, like that, I suppose that's why we hold ourselves to such high standards, because we want to get that right. You're trying to be the best mom and be the best journalist and be the best Jen. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Listening to you talk there, and now I'm going to sound like a mad weirdo, but it's actually making me emotional because I have, the whole way through the last decade of being a parent, have fought with what I want, because being a parent, like some days I'm like, I just want to be a stay-at-home mum because there's nothing else that I should be doing, because I love the bones of those kids and I want to ace that job. Okay, like I had a business, and unfortunately, yourself, being self-employed, you've got financial responsibility. So I had to go back. Yep. But I did take my maternities, and I did really resonate with that time, in that it just really was very important to me. But as I've gone on, it's not that I have devalued my role, because actually, as a parent, you grow and grow, and you love your kids more and more every day, because they change and they become hilarious and funny and fun to be around. But I've wanted to go back to work. But then when I was back in work full time in the pharmacy, all I wanted to do was be at home. And you're absolutely right. That's maybe the difference between some mums and dads, and I am not saying all, but for mums, you want to be present in a lot of cases with your children, but you're either A, forced back to work, or B, you want to work because you know that it's important for you. Your job is valid. Like, let's be honest, just as much as anyone, male wearing a suit. And, you were talking about, I mightn't be the best cook or seamstress, and meet your sister, but you're an excellent journalist. And sometimes I think we are slow to recognise that our work achievements are important. And it's not that if you're not working that you're underperforming, because for me, being a stay-at-home mum, and oh my God, particularly a single mum, that is an exceptionally difficult job that should never be underestimated. And a lot of women would like to be doing that role, but can't be. And so where we place our value, it's a constant fight, even in my own head. And look, I've been lucky because I've kind of managed to bring my two passions of parenting and pharmaceuticals, basically healthcare, together so that I can talk about both in a way that makes me happy, and I feel like I'm helping other parents, and that's really, really important to me. But it's taken me 10 years to kind of pivot, and it's a constantly difficult journey, and for parents with young kids who aren't maybe sure what's life going to look like for them in 5 years' time, like, it can be very overwhelming to try and navigate all of those feelings. You're absolutely right, because I just don't think men have that same mental turmoil all the time. It's hard.
We nearly created another judgment on women, that they feel they have to justify working too, because how are you devoted enough to your kids if you're working? That kind of question hangs in the air, and no one's asking it. Dads, nobody's asking these questions, and it creates that divide too. When really, if we want to get equality and we want to have a situation where women can thoroughly enjoy parenthood and embrace, I suppose, all the aspects of being a woman, then we need men to come in on the parenthood side of things too. We need them to be open to looking at parental leave, to be open to looking perhaps at taking, the summers with schools, when the schools are closed, are a particularly difficult time for parents trying to juggle it, looking at trying to help manage that too when the summer camps don't fill all the childcare hours that we need, or when we have somebody who's sick and we don't have somebody to mind our kids. It's about it being seen as this kind of equal responsibility, and we're not quite there yet. I think dads are getting so much better at it. I think the generation coming up are so much more aware of it, particularly because parents' leave has come in now and they're entitled to more of that, and we're so much more aware of it. But I think for those of us in the middle of it at the moment, it's a little bit hard to not feel that the responsibility and the weight of the parenting world and your respective employment world isn't on your shoulders,
And like, the old biases are ridiculous, because we're now in a place where, luckily, same-sex couples who have a wonderful home for a child with two loving parents are now able, well, they're actually not, which is a whole other ridiculous scenario, but the legislation isn't quite there to support them in terms of their legal rights of parenting. But in general, there are different shapes and sizes and appearances of families forming more obviously in society. And we need to make sure that there is room for those families to feel included, and that they're welcome at the parenting groups. And, it should never be a case of, okay, obviously breastfeeding, that's fairly niche. You can't do anything about that. But, the mums and tots should be parents and tots. And I think most people having children now would welcome that, because actually the crack you have in these groups is about the personalities, not the bloody gender, So, and that all maybe might help kind of progress the structures that you're talking about there in terms of parental leave and stuff. I hope so. You spoke there a little bit about your parents aren't around, so that the support network is difficult. How do you manage that, or where does your support come from? I suppose in terms of relationships changing throughout your parenting journey, who have you found you've ended up kind of relying on more as a mum?
I think at the beginning it was me and me alone, because I think the pandemic has changed things in that remote working became acceptable. It means, I suppose, even my husband worked out of the house the whole time through the pandemic, but now there's a small bit of flexibility and he can work from home the odd time. I do the bulk of it. But at the very beginning, when it was we had younger children, it was certainly we'd call on maybe my mother-in-law or whatever would come up from Carlow, and she might have it if I was going to an appointment in the hospital. But for the day-to-day things and all that sort of stuff, it was me and the troops. Where one had to go, we all went. And it was exhausting. For me, it really hammered home how much the village is missing. And I reflected on my own childhood growing up. And my mom didn't have, her parents were alive, but they weren't around kind of giving a handout. And it was the neighbours on the road, they were who helped out. And all the women were at home. So I suppose that was the difference. All the women were at home. And if one parent was doing the school run, they brought the 20 kids on the road on the school run. The neighbourhood really helped growing up. And we don't have that now. A lot of us don't even know our neighbours quite as well. People are coming and going, and you may be living in an area where people are all different ages and so very different stages of life, so you have different levels of connection. I tried some of the groups, and some of the groups worked. I reached out on social media to try and connect with other mums. I made some friends through there, even like old platforms, the original kind of parenting platforms that existed all those years ago. I'd have connected with people through there. I made some friends and mums in the school, and that was great, because you had maybe the odd shared pickup or the odd shared thing there, which was brilliant. But when you keep having children, those mums move on and they're at different stages. They don't all keep having children. And you find yourself either having to start again, or I suppose just go, this is the choice I've made. And it was hard. I ended up most of the time, as I think it happens to a lot of women as well, because when you make that career sacrifice, particularly if you have a partner then who's the main earner in your house, their job takes precedence or preference even, and so that what happens, they kind of continue. So it was largely me. I stood back and did that, and then I took between maternity leaves, which got me over a certain degree with the younger children. I came out and I stayed at home for a while. I moved to working from home, so it has been a constant juggle work-wise to make sure I was available.
Kind of celebrating motherhood today, it would be remiss of me just not to kind of say that I don't think that I've talked to many mothers between my friends on the podcast and just people around me who haven't experienced miscarriage at some point during their parenting journey. And it's so incredibly difficult, and it's so important for people to realise how sadly common it is. And while people mightn't, like, I know I struggle to talk about it a little bit, but I do amongst my friends and all of that. And I think it's important for people to reach out to their friendship circles and realise, even if they, it's their first baby that they suffer a miscarriage with, that they're still a mother and they need support as a mother just as much as someone who has a loss after having another child or whatever. Every situation is so hard. I think as soon as you get a positive pregnancy test, you have this love that is there, and that's what defines a mother,
That's you go into the future, you see that baby, you have the dreams, the hopes for that child's start. And it's funny, I think we all have our thing about parenthood that we don't like to discuss or that we avoid, and we maybe don't talk about. And I know I have my own things that I avoid. Postnatal depression is probably my one thing that I avoid, and I have spoken about it, but I tend to go, I can nearly tense up when we go near it, and yet I think it's a really important thing to talk about. But I know with miscarriage, I made a very conscious effort, particularly once I started writing for the papers and stuff, to talk about it. And my book is dedicated to my children, but also I think the line is, for the four I never held in my arms but hold always in my heart, because I wanted to make, like, they were very much part of me being a parent. There's a decoration for the four of them. Each of the four of them hangs on my Christmas tree. And I wanted, I suppose, their legacy to be that I spoke about this in an open way, and that we had these conversations, because even for that short little time that they existed. And I want people to talk about miscarriage, and it's such a painful thing to go through, and we all deal with it in our own way. And I was, after my first one in particular, was probably the most traumatic one for me. And it took me a long time, I suppose, to be able to talk about it. But I think it's such an important thing that we do speak about it, that nobody feels that they have to hide away. I think the 12 weeks things with pregnancy, where you don't tell anyone you're pregnant for 12 weeks. And it's that time when you're feeling most vulnerable, when you're feeling sick, when you're feeling tired, when you're most likely to have a miscarriage. And that whole secrecy, it's so shrouded in secrecy that as a result, if you do miscarry in those first 3 months, you feel, well, I can't tell anyone I miscarried because I never told them I was pregnant in the first place. And so I don't know that that's necessarily helpful unless somebody wants to keep it a secret, but there's an expectation that you should keep it a secret. Don't make your pregnancy too long for other people. Don't tell people in case you lose the baby. It won't make you lose the baby telling somebody. And if they find your pregnancy long, well, pity about them. You're the one going through
and also,
it. This whole
I'm sorry if I had a miscarriage is awkward for you. Like, seriously, do you know what I mean? It's like,
oh, God love you.
Yeah. I always adopted the mentality that anyone that I would tell that that I'd had a miscarriage, I would tell I was pregnant straight away. And that was really helpful because, like, they knew and understood. And sometimes I think it's one of those things when you suffer a miscarriage, or if you're trying for a baby and not able to conceive, that all of a sudden pregnant women are bloody everywhere. You're like, why is everyone pregnant around me or have newborns? You're like, ah. So it's nice to have people who understand that there may be circumstances where, you're feeling like you want to go puke because you just are upset about other people's joy, which is wrong, but it's the reality, you know.
You're dead right. When I had my second miscarriage, my next door neighbour was pregnant at the time, and she was due a month ahead of me. And then I lost the baby. I was close to 3 months, so I lost the baby. And I remember for the rest of that pregnancy, when I saw her coming, I ran into my house. Eventually, our daughter was born. And even her daughter, I often think when I see her daughter, I should have had another baby who was just a month younger. Now, it was difficult for my neighbour to understand. I didn't want her baby. I wanted my baby. And it was this constant reminder that I didn't have the bump like she had, that I should. And I think it's really helpful, like you said there, if people know, because they can understand your pain. They can understand why this is so hard for you to see pregnant people everywhere. It's that reminder of what should have been. Loss, and it's really hard, that loss, that grief, that absolute devastation and grief. And it, like you said, it's so common, but it's so hard. And it would be so great if we spoke about this more openly, if we got to that place where nobody felt they had to hide it, so we could kind of lift each other up as they're going through it and mind each other as they're going through it and dealing with their grief and loss, and even the physical practice, even that side of it, you know, trying to deal with the physically going through it. I mean, sometimes it's more traumatic than others when you're physically going through it, but if you're trying to keep that a secret and possibly bleeding really heavily and you're worried about where you're supposed to be because you're trying to keep things going and ticking over as normal, we need that support. Women need that support. It's better. I think things are a lot better, but it would be great if we could get rid of the taboo completely around pregnancy loss and baby loss.
And you're right, that can really only be done through conversation and openness. And maybe that's where there's been an issue, because it's not always easy to talk about. So work to be done there for everyone, I think. Before I wrap up and ask you about Mother's Day as a concept, I just want to bring us onto the slightly lighter topic of the hilarity, I suppose, of parenting, and how you go from having maybe work achievements or measurable achievements and successes in life in various ways, and then all of a sudden you're absolutely delighted that someone's done a pee on the potty, and enjoying the importance of enjoying those moments and the little successes and the wins, and how they're your new source of joy. You know, it's kind of funny.
You're right. I mean, those things that you're on Who Watch or you're on We Watch, and you're getting excited about the small things that you're going, I love Motherland. Have you watched Motherland? No. I love it because I think, it's so funny. It's so funny. I think we're all a bit of each of those moments. And it does all the kind of competitive parenting side things. And I love all these. And the stay-at-home dad is in there, and the mum doesn't give her shite about anything, and she's in there, and the highly stressed mum, and they're all brilliant parents. I think the reason that I love those sort of things, there's another one called The Letdown as well. It's absolutely brilliant. Australian, I think it is, comedy on Netflix. Absolutely brilliant. And I think the reason you relate to these so well, I think The Letdown is probably my favorite, but if you relate to it so well is because there are moments in there of absolute madness that you go, I can't believe I'm obsessing about what's coming out of her nappy, or I can't believe I'm obsessing about the fact that I managed to make some fruit puree, or I can't believe that I'm excited that a child rolled over. Look, and we're all, I mean, there's hours and hours of video footage of Chloe in particular. Typical, you have the album for the first child, and then you go, I mean, by the youngest child, I don't even think I've any photos of them off at this stage where she has her own album, and hours of video footage where we're sitting there, we're watching them. Look at the way she moves her leg or her hand, or and hours while we're waiting for her to roll over and about these tiny things, and nobody cares except you, but you're really excited. It's those things that bring us back to the absolute base, or the obsession about, punamis, and I suppose even things like the obsession. I don't know if you found after you had kids talking in great detail about childbirth, really wanted to come here, how bad, and it's just the whole, I think it's you trying to process that shock of what you've just gone through. And you need to talk. Well, I need to talk about it with other women. Your ick factor just disappears to a large degree,
You lose your control freakness in a way, because if you try and control motherhood, you'll be miserable. You have to roll with it.
Absolutely do.
Yeah, I think a relaxed approach is the only way to go.
You're dead right. I think that's just it. It's that loss of control at the beginning that probably we all struggle with. You lose control over how much you're going to sleep. You lose control over your house. I lost control over that a long time ago. You lose control over so much.
What for you are the happiest moments of being a mum? What brings you the most joy?
Well, when you see, I love the little sort of things like you see them walk along and you see one of the older ones take a little one's hand or something. I love to see that. Or you see kind of genuine affection, or the happiest moments. I suppose there's been times where maybe somebody's achieved something at school or won a medal at something, or just, something nice has happened. And I was taking one of my kids off, I suppose. To clarify this, when you have 7, you can't always do things equally. And that's just something I've come to accept. You can't take everywhere. Everyone doesn't get the same thing all the time, but you try to overall be equal, that it balances out. But sometimes there are different opportunities to do things. Sometimes there are different, you might go to the shops and you see something that's a bargain for one of them. You don't go and buy 7 just so that everybody gets something, things like that. You just common sense comes into play and you realize everybody will benefit at some stage. And that's the way it works. And I was way off. I was taking one of the kids off for a surprise last week. And it was just one of them was going. And I was looking at his little brother, who isn't that much older than him. And he knew he couldn't go on this occasion, but there was no resentment because he knows there'll be another time he'll get to go and do something. And he was heading out that day. And my little fellow was going to school late because of this. And he turned to him and goes, I can't wait to hear what your surprise is. Have a great time. And gives his little brother a kiss on the head and heads up. And that's it. I'm melted. I'm gone for the day. And I forget in that moment how they were killing each other just the day before, and you're thinking of how you're failing miserably as a mother, and you go, I've got this, look at my kids, they're good people. And they're, it's those kind of things where you realize how lucky they are to have each other. And I know I'm incredibly lucky. Like, I never take for granted that I was lucky enough to have 7, which I hoped. I had 4 miscarriages in there. I had a period of time where I found it very difficult to get pregnant. I know how incredibly lucky I am. And you're nearly sometimes afraid to say that because you don't want to cause upset and you don't want somebody to think you're oblivious to the difficulties other people have around having children. It certainly isn't that. But I see them together and I see the genuine love that they have for each other, and they really do adore each other. And you go to a parent-teacher meeting or something and they'll comment on how close they are and how, the siblings all look out for each other and they get excited to see each other if they pass each other in the corridor. And moments like that, things like that make me it's seeing them together, because I spend enough time beating myself up going, are they missing out because I had 7? Am I not able to do certain things because I had 7? And then they show me how much they love each other, and not intentionally, but just they're having moments. And I just go, wow, it melts me like nothing else.
There is a definite kind of loyalty there among siblings, which is very strong. Yeah. And they can be incredibly caring to each other, and like that's beautiful. Like, that's a wonderful thing.
That's amazing, and makes you it's just those moments that make your heart want to burst. It's hard to, until you're just there in it and you think this is what it's about. This is actually that they have each other, that they love each other, that they're all my babies, and you just couldn't at that moment. You just couldn't love them more, and yet you managed to. It's just there. That's what's. Those moments are the best moments of parenthood.
How do you feel about Mother's Day? Is it something you celebrate in your house, or are you not bothered? What does it mean to you?
It's kind of done for the kids, to be honest. I think it's really important that we celebrate mothers. Really important that we celebrate mothers. It will bug me that things will happen on Mother's Day. It's a bit like all these occasions. Things happen on certain days, and we show this great value and appreciation for mums, and then we kind of forget about it, and we don't do it to help with the actual things that we really need, and that goes both kind of on a local issue and kind of on a larger scale. Like we don't support mums in the way that they need to be supported. So, but I mean, for the kids, they'll be really excited. There'll be cards made in school that I'll get, and they'll be very keen to bring me up my cup of tea and digestives. And for them, absolutely. I don't know if I really subscribe to it. It's I didn't even realize until the other day it was Mother's Day. Like, it's become quite commercial. I think it's become very commercial, and it's kind of lost the true meaning of celebrating maybe motherhood, and that's a bit of a pity. But I do love the little cards and posts that you get, and the excitement that they have about doing that for you, or bringing you up your tea. Now, if they could make it a regular thing, I'd be much happier.
That'd be nice. And it is, you're right, it's lovely to go, oh wow, look at that, and those lovely coloured and flowers, and it's beautiful. Like, that is absolutely a lovely part of motherhood, and that is lovely to celebrate. I think you're right, like the commercialism of it is horrendous. The same with Valentine's and everything. But I think sometimes, you know, it's, I suppose, in its core ethos of reminding people to say thanks, Mum, it's nice, you know, but I'll have my tea in bed, thanks. And, you know, take that as a win and let that, you know, be all that it stands for, and enjoy the cards.
You know.
Jen, thank you so much for coming on to chat about your amazing experience of motherhood and all that it entails, including kind of work-life balance and trying to grab those few minutes for yourself. I'm so grateful because you're just gas and a wealth of knowledge. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sheena. Thanks a million for having me on. Thoroughly enjoyed the chats.